Hi, good day everyone. Okay, this is the third little video on that example one for you, which I ended yesterday. So this recording is just going to be on the expansion of that example, and we're basically looking at the improvement of that calculations that we did in the previous video. So we're still in unit 3, also appendix 1 still, and basically this is what where I ended off the previous video. So the site of the new building is not the same as before, therefore external works should be estimated separately and costs excluded from the unit rates. Okay, so very important to note that your external works are calculated separately. Then escalation, time, value, and money should actually also be taken into account, but it's neglected in this example. Okay, so just take note of that. If I do ask anything like that, please note that escalation can always and should always be considered. Sometimes you consider it as a negative, or you might include it like inflation just before the lockdown was basically negative, so it didn't really impact cost estimates that much, although if you're using previous rates of maybe a year or 2 years ago, it might have an impact, but for you it's more theory than actual implementation of how to do that, so just be aware of that. Okay, then these methods are now used again to demonstrate the effect of estimation external works separately. Okay, so in this video I'm not going to go too much into the measurement of the actual drawings. I'm going to focus more on the differences, so just be aware of that. Okay, so note that the allowances for the contingencies normally become smaller as the planning of the project continues and more information becomes known and is fixed. At this very early stage, the project an allowance of 12.5% for contingencies would be more appropriate. So okay, I think I mentioned that in the previous video of if in doubt you can actually put in 10% usually, but it really depends on the amount of information and your comfortability about it. So this is where experience usually comes in, what type of amount or percentage you should allow. Okay, so those are the few things that we're going to focus on. So let's look at the previous example. So the unit method, so total historical cost excluding P's and G's and VAT is 3.21 million. And then what you do is you take out the areas which is not applicable to the new building, or which varies in the next building. So that is very important. Okay, so these items that you selected here is the items that you will find on page appendix 1.11, and basically you take out the items which applies to or doesn't apply the same to your new building. So basically what they did is they took out the mass earthworks, any storm water drainage, pavements, and concrete fence, which is not the same in the new building. So you subtract that from your 3.2 million to get to a new historical data rate of 2.6 million, and then the historical tariff is thus calculated in the same way, and then you apply the same methods as previously. So what you do is you can times your rate with the number of units, in this case offices, to get 1.3 million as a new base estimation, and then you add the relevant items. So you can see in the new building there wasn't a lot of mass earthworks because it was quite a flat site that that you had a look at. So, and then you look at your stormwater drainage. So you can see here was a bit of an assumption that was made. So for our purposes at this stage, it's just a assumption that you need to make. Okay. So, and then we've got a wire fence instead of a concrete palisade fence, as in the previous meetings, previous calculations or previous example. So then you add those items to your estimation. So your pavement for parking, it's just a little calculation that's put in here to show that it's actually been calculated. And so you had a rate, the rate before that you actually use to get to a new rate, or to get to a rate that you can multiply with your new area. So paving would be added at 285,000. So you add all of, or you add these items together. I'm just going to change to blue now. And then you get to your new base calculation, and then you add your P's and G's and then your contingencies. Okay, note that they've kept the P's and G's the same, although please take note of the comments made earlier. Okay, so then you get to your new estimated amount, you add VAT to that, and then you get your new estimation based on that. So you can see it's quite a bit lower than the previous one, and thus a little bit more accurate when you take out your external works. Okay, so that's our first example. So let's do the same with our square meter calculation. So your historical unit tariff without external works is divided with the total area to get to your rate per square meter. Then you calculate your base estimation. You add your previous items which you calculated in the previous slide, and you get your new subtotal. Add your VAT or your P's and G's, and then your contingencies to that, and then you get your new estimated value of your project. So you can see what the difference is between the previous and this one, using the square meter rate area. Okay, so that is with your square meter calculations. Then we go to our cube method. Same method applies. You've got your historical cube rate, you times it with your new cube volume to get to your base. You add your external works and items that you added, and you do the same, and you get to your estimation at the bottom, and you can compare that to your previous calculation. Okay, so in short, that is a few items that you can actually, items that you need to take note of whenever enhancing your calculations, is to take out the relevant items or different items that you can actually calculate separately. So, and this is a very simple way that and very important thing that you can actually do to improve any estimation. So you can play around with these type of estimations, especially with your task that you're busy doing. You can play around with these parameters and actually get to a point where you can enhance your estimate according to this. Okay, so just a comment afterwards is the single price method of estimations can give good results only when the historical and new project values are very similar. So the main thing is to try and compare apples with apples. If the ratio of the number of offices to conference rooms and the ratio to toilets to offices, etc., varies, one cannot expect to estimate to be very accurate. Further adoptions are required which do not form part of the course. Okay, cool. So it's basically just the concepts. You can still play around in your estimate with these variations. When using the area method, it may be a good idea to calculate 2 unit rates, one for offices and one for conference rooms, and apply these separately. Note, however, that this example, there's a difference in the type of construction for the historical and proposed conference rooms. Thus, the rate calculation for the historical conference room can therefore not be applied to the proposed new conference room. Okay, so that's something worth noting. However, the results may be improved by separating the cost of finishes, fittings, and services so that each type of accommodation has its own rate, and to use the construction rate for the offices for both offices and conference rooms. So this is very important to note, that if you're doing a estimation for a new house, or the drawing that you're doing for your task, the historical data or rates that you're using, make sure that the finishing type is similar to the one that you're actually using. So and just make sure that you actually allow for that and make assumptions. You can make comments on that, the rates that you used, and so forth. Basically just highlighting any assumption that you have made in the calculation process. Okay, it is always a good idea to estimate the cost items that have no relation to the size of the building. Okay, so we've dealt with that. And then the unit method will give poor results when the office size is not the same for the historical and proposed projects. So obviously, if the offices has different sizes, it will have a different impact on your calculations, because this is not taken into account when calculating the unit rate. If the proposed project did not have conference rooms, all the costs for the conference rooms have to be omitted from the historical rate. It is not always possible to separate costs as discussed above, as it depends on the way in which the available historical data is presented. Okay, so basically you have to make an assumption there from the information that's presented to you, how you're going to apply it and how it's going to affect your estimate. So since the single price estimation method are methods used during the early stages of the project, it may be more appropriate to use a larger percentage for contingencies to reflect the uncertainties inherent at the early planning stages. See also the notes on cost data in Appendix 4 in this regard. So we're still going to go into this a little bit in more depth, but I think for now this is more or less what you need to know. Okay, so thank you very much. That is our third little video, and the last one on Appendix 1, the example. So good luck to everyone in going through the work and so on. We'll talk again.